Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we share the practice, the pedagogy, and the politics currently happening in public education. As always, I ask that you write your name in the comments when you come in, and that you let us know your thoughts, observations, and questions about the topic being discussed. I'm a longtime teacher, so I enjoy having an actively participating class. And so if you will write your reactions to what you're hearing, that will help me know how you're being affected by the news and the information. So even if you are, by the way, coming in later and not live, if you write your questions in there, I'll still see them and I'll get back to you. So there's always a chance to ask Dr. Be Good and get a response from Ask Dr. Be Good. Now we are continuing in our Black History Month series with Clarence Glover, a.k.a. Professor Freedom, and we welcome him back to talk about the civil rights era. We talked about, first of all, the African-American timeline the first week, and then the second week, last week, we talked about public education for African-American students and how it went from 150 years ago to now. And so today we're going to focus in on the civil rights era and also his part in it, because we're very fortunate to have somebody who was there, met some of the really important people that were part of it, and the important work that he himself did. So Clarence, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Be Good. How are you doing?
Good. So Clarence, just because we might have people back for here for the first time, talk a little bit about your background before we start with our work.
Well, President, of course, I work with U Legacy as a consultant in multicultural area, working with students, faculty, and staff for the last about 8 or 9 years. We've done quite a bit of work there in terms of dealing with adult diversity policies and practices and training and working with students. Before then, I was at the Dallas Independent School District as Assistant Superintendent in charge of intercultural relations at the Dallas Independent School District for 15 years. And then before that, I was at Southern Methodist University as the Director of Multicultural Student Affairs and Professor of African American Studies at Southern Methodist University for 16 years. So I spent about 30-something years dealing in areas of African American studies and multicultural education.
So you just brought up the fact that you've been working in it 30 years, but at what age did you actually become involved in the civil rights movement?
Well, actually, my life is centered in it because my father and my mother were activists. My aunts were activists. The men and women around me were activists in Shreveport. My father is from Memphis, and my aunt was a part of the civil rights movement up in Memphis. I would go there as a child, so I remember very vividly both in Shreveport, where Reverend Harry Blake, who was Dr. King's lieutenant, he just passed recently of COVID. He was the oldest lieutenant living, and he was my mother's sister's boyfriend growing up in the country. So I knew him. And so we grew up. He was beaten on the steps of Little Union Baptist Church by Commissioner of Public Safety, George Dartois, 1 inch of his life. And the city only recently apologized before he passed. And so I grew up in the shadow of the civil rights movement. My father always reminded me of the fact that he and Dr. King were the same age. They both had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. He was born in Memphis. My father was born in Memphis. Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis. So I have this link with the movement. And then when Dr. King was assassinated, before the Lorraine Motel became an official hotel, I actually went to the hotel as a child, and the guy who was there gave me a picture, and I sat on the bed where Dr. King slept for the last time. And he gave me a picture which I've superimposed over another picture of Dr. King where he says, "Free at last." And that Polaroid picture he gave me that he took at Dr. King's funeral, I superimposed it here. So you have the words "Free at last, Dr. King," and then you have him in the casket. And so this began an early stage of my life, reading and studying deeper Dr. King's life in the civil rights movement.
Who are some of the key civil rights figures that you've been associated with? Because again, we're fortunate to have you here, part of not only today, but part of our district as a consultant and as someone who is bringing this message to our children?
I have known over the years and worked with Mrs. King, Mrs. Rosie Parks. I just have here some pictures, of course. This is, of course, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and here we're sitting in her office at the King's in Atlanta. In 1986, I was the interviewer and consultant for the first Martin Luther King holiday in Atlanta for 2 weeks, and she commissioned me to be the consultant and interviewer for the first King holiday that was an official federal holiday. That came as a result of me going to the King Center over a number of years with Mrs. King, where in this picture, this is Mrs. King's article with Mrs. King and I and Dr. Bernard Lafayette. And behind us is Dr. C.T. Vivian. And I'm receiving the award from Mrs. King and Dr. Lafayette, Dr. Vivian, for being that year, back in 1983, I was named Advisor of the Year to students, African American Black students in higher education. The program they had out the King Center, training students in nonviolent strategies. And I was a trainer at the center. And so I began working with the center a number of years ago, where I met individuals, and I have a picture I just pulled out the file. This, you can't see it, but this is a small picture of me. I was standing on the podium at the Sisters Chapel in Spelman College, and it is Mrs. King is in this audience, but I didn't get her shot. And in this picture, you have James Bevel and Dorothy Cotton, and these were the people who were listening to my presentation on Martin Luther King at Spelman College in Atlanta back in 1981. And James Bevel, he was the major strategist. Dorothy Cotton was she was the woman on the staff of SCLC. You have James Orange, who was you can see him, he's considered the giant. He was a huge giant man. All these were Dr. King's direct lieutenants, who I became associated with and began to work with. And then, of course, here we have Mrs. Rosa Parks, who here in Dallas, when I was working on the police reform issues, which we dealt with in the 80s and literally changed the policies from property over life to life over property, changing the deadly force policy. We got rid of the chokehold, which you hear about today. And I trained the Department of Multicultural Affairs and updated the affirmative action policy. That we had a congressional hearing here in Dallas, Congressman John Conyers. Then I went to Washington, D.C., where Mrs. Rosie Parks and myself testified before Congress regarding police abuse in the African-American community. So over the years, I've worked with a number, Dr. Lafayette, Congressman John Lewis, Dr. C.T. Vivian, these individuals, and they trained me in the principles of nonviolence, and many things I did at SMU and DISD, and now with you. Based upon the principles of Dr. King's principles. And so therefore I'm considered an apostle of Dr. King, not a disciple, because I did not know him personally, but I knew his wife. I knew Mrs. Parks, and they trained me in the principles.
Can you talk, you remind me of a story that you told me, and I think it's important that it be told again. Can you remind us of how you were able to find the missing Martin Luther King documents at SMU?
Certainly. I have that article here, as a matter of fact, and I have that picture. When I came to Dallas many years ago in the African American community, it was always said that the ministers ran Dr. King out of Dallas because Dallas is the last southern city. And when the Union Army, Sherman, and were pushing down out of the north, many of the plantation owners came to Texas. Long story short, Texas has become the preserver, if you will, of the system of slavery and of Jim Crow. So Dr. King was not welcome in Dallas during this movement, and many attempts were. He came to speak at Good Street. Dr. Caesar Clark was a friend of Dr. King, Dr. Daddy King, but he did not lead a movement here in Dallas. He was not allowed to organize, if you will. So Dr. Red James brought him in to speak with ministers and so forth, but never organizing. Again, the key word is organizing. He never led a movement in Dallas. But we'd always heard he was turned away. So while I was at SMU, and we started the Martin Luther King March there and other things, but Dr. Willis Tate, the former president, came to me one day and said, "Clarence, did you know I brought Dr. King here to speak?" I said, "Sir," I said, "we always told that he was not allowed to really come to Dallas and do it. So no, he said he was brought here, and I said when? It was in March of 1966, and there were no records on campus that I found. So I started looking through the archives, and eventually I came up on the actual tape here that was recorded. I'm in the archives in the back here. This is an article, two articles I found, and I framed the articles and put them in students. They're there today, and the tape was digitized. So now you can go to the computer and pull up Martin Luther King and SMU's speech and hear it. And recently, this news article was done recently in the African American newspaper, and many people have told me, they said, we never thought he was there because they were not invited to SMU at the time in 1966. And this is a picture of him at the podium speaking here at SMU with his
Who
aide
was he?
behind him.
Who was he speaking to? Who was it?
He was speaking to the audience, from what I understand. Now, he was speaking to the SMU audience, business people, students. And I understand there were a few students who came from Bishop, but not a lot of African Americans were there. And so now the tape is there. My desire is that we would use the tape as a study, because it is really, out of all the things I've studied on Dr. King, he's usually in a movement mode, I call it. And he's talking about, but here he's in a lecture mode, which is very, very rare, where you actually hear him speaking in a lecture mode. It's like the other day when I was going through my files, I found something that's quite historical as I was preparing for today. But this is a tape of Martin Luther King III here in Dallas. And he and I were at breakfast with some other ministers back in the 90s. And it's on a cassette, which I'm going to turn into digit because it's digitized. But I just like to very, very quickly, if you can.
Local chapters and the goals and objectives. But I think number one, we have got to rebuild our base, which basically was the church, as you know, as you've been one of the longtime members, and reassert ourselves and address issues that the whole community feels are very important. Now, there are 3 or 4 issues that I think affect every community, and then there are several others. Right now in Atlanta, for example, we are challenged because the public hospital funds have been cut out from the public hospital, and so they're now passing that cost on to the indigent patients. So patients who typically would have paid 50 cents per visit and maybe $1 or $3 per prescription, it goes from 50 cents to $10 for prescriptions.
I just want to let you hear his voice and let you recognize that we have the tape of Dr. King now, but also I have a tape of his son where we and other ministers were sitting at breakfast discussing organizing in terms of issues at the time.
There's no question that this has been just a long-standing, ongoing movement, fight, battle, whatever, you know. And next week we're going to talk more about current, how it's playing out today. But let's stay focused on the past a little bit. What civil rights events did you take part in with some of these figures and then on your own?
One of the key civil rights movements for me was here in Dallas with the police department. Here in Dallas, African Americans were being killed. Young men would pick up something and get shot in the back for stealing property, if you will. It was just devastating in Oak Cliff. Not justifying the stealing, but yet we were dealing with the issue of the deaths, if you will. So as a result of chairing the NAACP Police Community Relations Committee, we had a meeting with Chief Prince at Romine Park South YMCA. So everybody was just very tense. And at that time, I stood up and basically asked the chief of police here in Dallas, did they have a deadly force policy? And in asking that question, it had never been asked before by anybody in the community. Not only did I ask, but I asked if I could come down and review it. And so I, along with two other individuals, went to the Dallas Police Department, and we began to review the Dallas Police deadly force policies having to do with property over life. At that time, it was property over life. It meant that they could justify still shooting somebody. They had your property in their hands, shoot them, give you your property back, and they were dead. We changed that policy from property over life to life over property back in the 80s. We also got rid of the chokehold, which was being used throughout in the police department. We also updated the affirmative action policy, which gave rise to the recruitment of more Hispanic and African American and women officers. Again, I used my what I was taught by Dr. King's associates to come here and engage the city of Dallas at that time. Then my second significant event came in East Texas, where the Mount Moriah Baptist Church was actually definitely. But before then, I was called in by SCOC. These are churches being burned in East Texas. These are all churches, African American churches in the rural areas that were being burned down. I would go out and investigate the community, and at that time it was a very challenging thing because my family didn't know where I was going. I didn't tell very many people. But I'm in the woods here of East Texas, documenting the burning of these churches. You see.
What years was that?
Let's see. These are back in 1990. 1990. Yes.
You know, Clarence, 1990.
Yes, these are 1990s.
Like, so recent. You know, you didn't say the 60s. You said the 90s.
1990. Yes, yes. This is.
Ooh.
These are 1990. And this picture shows Peter Johnson, who was who worked at Dr. King, coming to my congregation and asking me to go to East Texas. He's the one who charged me to go. He's still in Dallas. And here is Mount Moriah Church. If you look very closely, you see the 333, the N word, KKK sprayed across the front of the sign here.
1990s.
Yes, you see the church if you can. Again, the KKK. 311 means KKK. When you ever see the word 311, that represents KKK. So you have the KKK written all across the church, the N word all across the building here. You have, but what I did, I went in this campaign. I brought together whites and blacks, and here they came to the church. We actually brought community to the church to see it. You see, but later on, we worked together as a community to take the walls down, and the walls are in the African American Museum now in Fair Park. I hope one day to put them up to be able to see them again, particularly during this time. And here we had a rally. This was the campaign. This was the largest civil rights rally in Texas to bring in recent times. And here, these are the 4 young white men who did it. I went into the community, and that night at the rally, the parents brought them to the rally. And at that rally, we had Martin Luther King III, Dr. C.T. Vivian, Ada Bernice Johnson, FBI, and we had the rally. And in this book, I have not only the program, but we have a letter from the Byrd family, James Byrd, who was drugged a few years ago. And this is a letter from the Byrd family supporting the rally. This is the pastor. And so all these are pictures of different people, white and black, at the rally. And here you have me with the young men and their parents in the back. I want to exhibit these one day because I've never done that before. Mothers hugging children. These are all the white parents coming because we were working on reconciliation, restoring love. But before that, here's a young man coming in. I have their names today. I have the court case. But back here you have myself, Dr. C.T. Vivian, who just passed on the same day with John Lewis. You have Danny Deffenbaum from the FBI. You have Mark Herdner from the Anti-Defamation League. Not Mark Herdner. This is Mark Herdner, I'm sorry. The other gentleman is from the Anti-Defamation League. But then you finally have we have Martin Luther King III. Here he is with the young. That's Martin Luther King III, and here we are with the young men in the session. That's Martin. Dr. Martin Luther King was our keynote speaker that night. Here he is speaking, and so this was the largest civil rights campaign in recent years.
So, as you were talking, I know that in Dallas, in the Fair Park area, they have the African American Museum. Why haven't they dedicated a wing to all your artifacts and you?
Well, that's a question you have to ask Dr. Harry and Dr. Delaney.
I think we do. But anyway, what have you learned from all this, Clarence? What has the civil rights movement taught you?
First of all, the civil rights movement was a movement not simply for African Americans. I think that's one of the misconceptions. Throughout the movement, they taught us that the civil rights movement was designed to save the black man's body and the white man's soul. Using that phraseology, black person's body, black person's soul, black women as well as women. It was because our physical bodies were being attacked throughout the history of this country. But also there was a mental chain, if you will, as I said, we're taking the chain off your brain. There's a mental chain of shackles on the minds of white America. And also of African Americans and people who become free physically, but are still enchained mentally, if you will. So subsequently, the movement is twofold. And that's why I do a great deal of work, not only in the African American community, but I also seek to work with the white community very directly. And it becomes uncomfortable sometimes because Dr. King and others taught us that, when you speak truth to power, it's a difficult moment for individuals to hear that truth. And you have to be sure that you're speaking truth and not just emoting your feelings. For an example, the other day, I've been sharing with several people about the Statue of Liberty from the story. And I share the story now, and I say, do you know the history of the statue? Everybody says, oh, it came from France. Yes, yes. But do you know the history? Then I said, Dr. Le who was from Versailles, France, abolitionist of slavery, had the idea. Long story short, at the feet of the Statue of Liberty are shackles at her feet. Most people don't know that. And so when I tell them the fact that the Statue of Liberty was given to America as a symbol of the end of the Civil War by France, and not just simply the 100-year anniversary, but it was given as a symbol, and that's what it means. And you can Google and go to the new museum at the Statue of Liberty at Ellis Island, and they will give you a clip of that. And so I created a poem. I don't have it. I was going to use it at hand in somewhere. I read it the other day. I had it right here. But I wrote a poem for us to be able to know the truth about the Statue of Liberty.
So you can put that in a picture of that and your other pictures in the post, so
Yes.
that people can have that and have it available. But no, you're right. We do need to start unshackling our brains from the white standpoint. I know that uncomfortableness is something that I've seen you do. I know when you've worked with our staff, for example, some of the activities that you had them do made some of our people very uncomfortable. And we had to work at helping them understand that there's only growth that comes from new, often uncomfortableness, right? And so...
well, one of the things, Becky, is that I wrote several articles over the years, and one of the articles I wrote was called "The Other Side of Racism," and the other side of racism was written to help us understand the causes and effects. But the causes, I oftentimes say to people that you can't break a person's leg up, and then hide the bat and blame them for the way they walk. So America has broken the legs, if you will, of people of color, hit in the back, and then say, "Oh, why are you crippled? Why are you poor? Why are you living in at-risk conditions? So I wanted to understand the bat. And so we, in our article, The Other Side of Racism, we talk about the causes of racism. And many scholars uh, back then uh, would give us the reasons of racism. One of the major causes of racism was put into the Kerner Commission report under President Johnson, Congressman Otto Kerner. And what he stated in the Kerner Commission report, which you can look up, that anyone could look it up now, the Kerner Commission report, and it's what Black America can never forget, and what white America does not understand, is that white America created the ghetto, white America supports the ghetto, and white America condones the ghetto. And that was a summary in the report. And it says that white America must move ahead with all deliberate speed to do the necessary work to undo what it had done. And here again, we see the word racism as being a word that only for some whites, like what I just showed you, oh, those are the racists, the ones who did this church, burned the churches down in East Texas. What white America doesn't understand, that America is a racist system. It was founded on racism and sexism. And so subsequently, all white people in America are racist by design, not by desire. The question is, do they have a desire to change the design? Just as men are. I'm a sexist by design. I wasn't born like, I mean, I didn't, it was here when I arrived when I was born. The system of sexism was all around me. As I became aware as a man, I had to ask the question, do I have a desire to change this sexist system? If I don't, then I benefit from it and continue to benefit from it. Therein, I'm a participant in the sexist system. And even if I become a change agent, I still am a part of it, because the system is larger than any individual. This is where we struggle with whites, because so many times they say, I'm not racist. And that's not the issue. Is that, do you understand the system? Because race is not about an individual, it's about groups of individuals. Even the term racist, the white race, brown, and the black race, that's a racist concept, because you're dealing with white to black in a caste relationship, you see. So subsequently, white Americans struggle with the idea of trying to say, I'm not a racist. Even teachers, I tell them, if a student, however, tries to play the race card on you and say, Miss Jones, you know, you just racist, Miss Jones. I say to white teachers, I say, don't try to argue, don't get hurt. Don't just say, yes, Rakeem, I know I'm white and we live in America, and America is a racist system. However, this is not about right now, America, this is about you not doing your homework. Do your homework, or do your lesson. What she's done, she's diffused it. I've had white teachers who told me when they used it, it worked. I said, I know it works, because what you're doing now, you're not trying to, oh, I'm not a racist, I'm not a racist. You know, no, you're letting him know, yes, racism is real. Racism is reality. But Rakeem, right now, you're not doing your lesson.
Yeah.
Do your lesson, okay, Rakeem?
That's good. And so really my last question was about what all this has to do with education, and you're sort of bringing that up naturally.
Well, it is a question. Dr. King said it's an issue of legislation and education. And because you must have legislation first, which keeps you from attacking. I mean, that's what we did at SMU. When I was there, when I came to SMU's campus, you have the second largest, I understand, Confederate flag, or one of the largest, on top of the a.k.a. house at SMU. We had the Old South Ball in 1979 when I arrived on campus. I could not go to school with a Confederate flag and Old South Ball. So that I started my activism again on campus. We got rid of the Old South flag. We got rid of the Old South Ball. And when I became a staff member, the first thing I did was to begin drafting a diversity harassment policy. One of the first in the nation at a major university. Well, at that time, we had white students who were doing just a render, and parents. Parents would bring their students there, particularly young ladies. And if a young African-American woman was in the same room, they would leave out the room and go tell the directors, whatever, change my daughter, you know, things like that. We had after incident, we had theme parties, blackface parties, et cetera, on campus at SMU. So with the policy in place now, students were held accountable.
And so, Clarence, we were talking about your time at SMU, and I think we sort of got caught up in your Dallas power issues that are happening this week. But I'm glad you're back to give us a strong finish. We've had a great conversation with you again this week, and next week we will finish up our series on Black History Month with you on the current happenings. Everything we've done the last 3 weeks is leading us to the conversation that we're going to have next week around the really the current civil rights movement, right? I don't know if there's a name for it yet. I mean, we called what was happening in the 60s the civil rights movement. Is there a name for what's happening now?
Well, certainly you have the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's been compared to the civil rights movement. And the article that was in D Magazine, which they did on me, I allude to the fact that one of the missing parts of that movement, however, is the presence of elders and individuals who organize with the young people, as well as a specific strategy based around nonviolence. Even though during the civil rights,
don't share it because we don't want to steal next week's thunder, right?
Okay.
just give an inference of it, a teaser, okay, right?
Allude to, yes, because we are talking about how we move forward. But what we've done these past several weeks is to look at a principle I created in education when I was at Harvard with Dr. Lawrence Kohlberg, who was looking at issues of moral justice, moral education. And Kara Gilligan was writing a book, and she wrote a book in another voice. So I did my postgraduate work at Harvard under Dr. Lawrence Kohlberg. Many people know me in this area, Piaget and others. But I was looking at the cultural dimension, but he was looking at justice, and particularly men, the Heinz dilemma, and the issue of legality and rigid legality versus changing unjust laws. But I created a concept based upon reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is what I call the technical tools of education. And so I developed reconstruction, reevaluation, redirection. We've done that on our sessions. We've been reconstructing the past. We've been looking at the past, talking about things that have been left out of history, because people got to think about those things. Then we moved into a reevaluation stage where we are now. I'm certain many people who are listening are uncomfortable with what they've heard. That's reevaluating your emotions, your thoughts, looking at it, separating it from me as an individual. And that's what I try to do. I try to get information that I'm not hollering at you, I'm not spitting at you, I'm not cursing you. You're struggling with the information. You're having a cognitive, dissonance going on in your brain. Oh, wait a minute, this right, wrong. Statue of Liberty, wait a minute. And so you have to reevaluate these truths. If you come out of that process saying, I want to make a difference, not for a minority of people, but for me as a white person, what does that mean for a white person? You then move into the redirection stage, which is next week. How do we move forward? What actions? What steps? What would I sacrifice? What would I have to give up? How would it affect my relationships? And many white people have to ask those questions, because when they move into a position, as a man, I have to ask that question. When I'm as a man, say, guys, that's not right, man. Oh, Glover, come on, boy, it's gonna be no. When I told him at SMU, no, we don't do that. No. So I have to, if you will, redirect my manhood in a way that I was trained a certain way. You see, I benefit from certain things, but now I'm going to redirect. And that means a personal introspective look. And then it becomes a collective look. I think as we come out of this cold, we have some new questions because they directly relate to the history of slavery, Texas, the Lone Star State, being independent, not wanting to be regulated by anybody. We now all suffer the consequences of that type of historical mentality that justifies slavery. We want to own what we own, cheap labor, free labor. We don't want to build the best plants. We don't want to put the electric lines deep enough. These are all questions now that we're all having to grapple with, because Injustice, as I said, Dr. Kingdom said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
And on that, we're going to let you go. And I think next week we have a lot to talk about.
Thank you
I
so
think
much.
we may actually go the whole hour next week. There's just so much on this. But thank you, Clarence, always
Well,
for your insights, for your uncomfortableness. Thank you for that.
Let me thank you. Let me thank you, Dr. Good, and also to say, as many people think, we think Black History Month is over. I hope that what we've said, I hope that what we've done, I hope that people are listening, and I know you do it. So I want to encourage the others, particularly whites, that you would truly, and many African Americans, take on this simply as a month of preparation to do the work, and then come back next year and let us celebrate something that has been done this year.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And we look forward to next week.
Be safe. Take care.
You too. So, gosh, we have so much work to do in that area, and just the inequities that Clarence alluded to as far as the snowstorm in the Dallas area and other areas have shown again the fact that we have our neighborhoods that have had more power losses than other areas that were not quite as African American and Latino. So we do have lots of work to do in the inequities area. And so I thank him again for being on. Our next guest is a dual language coach, and she will be bringing us the opportunity that we have for students to bridge some of these inequities, so to speak, by adding on a second language to our students. And let me mention that one of the struggles that my district has had in the dual language program is that oftentimes American parents who seem at first to love the idea of having their children learn a second language or even a third language, because in our area we're not only just Spanish, we're Chinese also. But as soon as their child speaks of struggling with the second or third language, the parents want to rush to the defense of the child and save them from that. And so let's chat with Miss Vildalis Bermudez. She is a dual language coach for a public school district, and she is going to chat with us a little bit about the benefits of letting your child be in a dual language program and to struggle in it, because struggle done right leads to new successes. And so welcome, Ms. Bermudez, and thank you for being on.
Good morning, Dr. Good. As Dr. Good stated, I'm a dual language instructional coach. I have been in a bilingual education for 19 years. So it's a pleasure for me to be here today.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the benefits of the dual language program, and how long has it been going on? Talk a little bit about the history, sort of how it has evolved.
Some people think that the bilingual program is just something recently, and it actually started in the United States in 1839 in Ohio. They endorsed some type of bilingual instructions in their public school districts. However, in the 1900s, already 12 states started some type of bilingual education. And by 1968, we have the Law versus Nickel Supreme Court case that states that we have to establish some type of support to bilingual instruction to our Chinese kids become barriers in their classrooms.
And that was done in California, I believe, right?
Yes, that happened in California in 1968.
And so how did it evolve from a Chinese issue now to a Spanish one?
Well, actually, the decision obligate to assist non-English speaking overcome linguistic barriers. So that also apply to Spanish and to other language speakers as well.
So really, it was about making sure that kids from other countries who arrived in big numbers treated in a different way. And if I'm remembering my bilingual history correctly, because I was a bilingual teacher and I have a master's from a long time ago, I think I graduated in 1998, so it's been a while. The law said that it's not enough to treat kids with second languages the same by giving them the same textbook and giving them the same teacher. And so that's how the bilingual program evolved into what it is today, which is I believe the federal numbers are 30. If you have 30 kids in a grade level that speak that language, that we must offer bilingual education. Is that correct?
20. It's 20.
Now 20. It used to be 30. So now, whoa, okay. Things have evolved since I got my master's 20 years ago. But now talk a little bit about the difference between the dual language program and the bilingual program.
Well, the dual language program has two different type of instructions. It could be in one way or two ways. And it has a lot of benefits. In fact, many studies state that a second language learner can learn another language as easier as walk. So for kids, so that it's very impressive. And also it provides a lot of capacity in the brain. And in addition, I was looking through a recent study from Michigan State University that state that bilingual kids or people can keep their brain more healthier than people that are only monolingual. So can have some type of delay or protect to have some mental conditions such as Alzheimer. So it's not only beneficial in the career, as everyone knows nowadays, being multilingual, it's very beneficial for our global community, but it also beneficial in our health as well.
You're right. El que sabe dos idiomas vale por dos, ¿verdad? Those languages, those that know two languages are worth double. But, I've often heard that for the even old brain, old being, over 50, they encourage people over 50 to learn something new like chess or to learn a new language that they've never spoken before because it helps the brain. But in the case of children, the United States, I don't think, has done a very smart thing as far as teaching of a second language, and that is they start teaching second languages usually in 9th grade because it's a requirement of the of the district and of the state to have at least 2 years of a language, right? And so districts have become very bad about seeing the compliance around that as a checklist, right? Oh my gosh, you got to have 2 years of a second language, and we're either going to offer Spanish or sign language, right? Because a lot of kids find sign language easier and more glamorous for a second than learning Spanish. Now, how many people do we really know that need to have sign language as a second language that they can use in the daily life versus Spanish, for example? And so it's become a compliance thing and a understanding that it's a necessary part of a career opportunity, right? And so we at Legacy in our district, we start our dual language program in very early on. Why is that a good idea to start a dual language program with all kids starting like in kinder?
Well, like I said before, so it's easier for kids to acquire new language and skills at the earliest stage. And that's many studies state that, so it's not something new. And kids are like a sponge, so it's easier for them to acquire skills and languages easily than us as an adult. Also has a lot of beneficials, kids that learn a second language at the early stage has been proved that it develop more linguistic skills, memory as well, and also problem solving.
So, is there data that show that kids, like English-speaking kids, not our Spanish-speaking kids, but our English-speaking kids who come into a dual language program in kinder and go on up, they actually learn the language easier, and do they score better later on?
Yes, that's true. They score better as later on in the state exams.
So, am I right in remembering that English-speaking students who are learning Spanish or another language early on score higher in English later on, not only in the second language, but also in English above their friends who don't take a second language?
I'm sorry, Dr. Good, I was unable to hear you. Can you?
So am I right in remembering that students who take a second language early on in the dual language program, they came in speaking only English.
Mm-hmm.
They're in 5th grade, they've had English, Spanish, and in our case, they've also had Chinese, but let's say only English and Spanish, that they actually score higher in English in 5th grade, for example, than their friends who didn't take Spanish as a second language along with English.
Yes, that is true. That is true. In the case of Spanish, they develop the grammar skills in both languages. They develop the reading comprehension skills of in both languages, as well the listening and speaking.
And so you're making me remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, that students who came in only speaking English sometimes did not score as high as their friends in 2 or 3 years down the road, but later on scored higher. Am I remembering that correctly?
Because they are able to transfer the skills from one language to another.
And so that's a message that we need to have parents understand. And you're making me remember things that I used to, as a bilingual teacher, have to share with parents, that your child who's in a dual language program may not score as high in their English language skills the first 2 or 3 years that they're in a dual language program. And so I used to sort of tease parents about the fact that you may have your child's cousins, you're talking at the family reunion and you're talking to your sister, and your sister's bragging on the fact that her child is doing really well in English, or maybe on their report card, and your child is not scoring as high in 3rd grade as the cousins. But later on, if you stay in the dual language program, your bragging rights as a parent is that your child not only now is scoring higher in English than the cousins, but they also have a second language to be able to have and be able to use, especially if they continue that on. And hopefully the parents would recognize the need to have their child continue taking Spanish in middle school and in high school, and they can start taking dual credit Spanish. And so we're starting to get dual credit Spanish college hours in high school, because I did that.
Yes, and that's very beneficial. Also, Dr. Good, I have the experience. I have a young adult girl, which is moved to the States when she was in 8th grade. And of course, they did in the district like a pre-assessment to see in which English level she was. And at that time, she was an 8th grader, but she scored like a 5th grade student. However, because she transferred her first language to the second, and the same year, she scored higher than monolingual kids on the state assessment.
So your own daughter benefited and you saw the data play out in your own child.
Yes, so that's why I actually promote it, because I'm not only because I'm bilingual, also because I experienced that with my two kids as well.
And so, how are you making sure, for example, you have a 5-year-old, how are you making sure your 5-year-old stays in Spanish? Because the United States is very English dominant. I mean, it's, even though we say we value other languages, we don't show it. How?
So my little one was born and raised in the United States, therefore his first language is English. However, I enrolled him since pre-K on a bilingual program. So he's assisting to a Spanish school because I want to enforce him to learn Spanish as in his case, Spanish as a second language. For me, it's very important as a parent, provide him the opportunity for this global world and the opportunity to have better careers, and of course, as you already know, for health as well.
So the dual language program is what I'm hearing is to start early for parents to support us as far as when their child says that their child doesn't enjoy Spanish because it's so foreign to their ears. What does a teacher do to help with that? How does a teacher scaffold the content that the child is hearing in Spanish so that the child over time learns what the teacher is saying in Spanish and actually learns it in the second language?
It is important to incorporate motivation and acknowledge the kids the importance of learning second language, of course, at the grade level, but also the strategies we use for scaffolding kids. So such as TPR, a lot of visuals material, modeling, sentence stem. And we also provide those type of moments in which a student has like the silent period. They acquire the knowledge, but they're not feel confidence to express. So we have to provide some other type of activities to promote their understanding and to promote the development of a second language. We can use graphic organizers. Now that we are virtual, we are capable to use some type of free models, virtual, and any Google platform or any educating platforms that you use with Cameo and the other resources. As well, you can use some type of Jamboard and virtually that activities that can promote the students feel confidence to that second language if they are in the stage of that silent period.
So my message to parents is if your child is in a dual language program and the child is coming home complaining that they're not understanding what the teacher says, what advice do you give parents?
Well, the first advice for the parents is to communicate with the facilitator and express their concern and try to get some support from the facilitator from them to work at home as well. Even though maybe they're not Spanish speakers, they can get some guidelines to support their kids at home as well.
You're right, because a dual language program needs the support of not only a well-trained teacher, but also the support of the parents. The children need to feel like there's not a choice here. There's not a choice as to whether the child's going to learn that second language or not. If the parent talks to the child about the fact that you're getting an opportunity that I didn't have, and you're early enough and your brain will accept it if you allow it, child. And I'm saying to you, this is a non-negotiable. You will be able to compete with other second language learners in your business world. And I know that feels like a long time away, but we are setting the foundation for your business and career opportunities now. And so, child, you will learn this this second language, because I'm going to make it fun for you. The teacher's trying to make it fun for you, and you will open yourself up. And so I will tell you that some of the successes that our district has had is that we've had kids who have dominated and won our Spanish spelling bees, even to the point where we had an African-American child win our Spanish spelling bee over Latino kids. And we got the biggest kick out of that. I mean, that's how you know your dual languages program is working, when you have kids who don't look like Hispanic kids winning the Spanish bee, the spelling bee. And so I would say, parents, be supportive, work with the teachers, because it's a different teacher every year, but make sure your child understands that we have a future opportunity to make your child stand out against other resume candidates, right? Because then your child will have a second language because you helped motivate your child to stay focused on the importance of learning a second language. And
Yes.
so what final advice would you give to parents as far as how they can motivate kids at home?
My final advice for parents is to be supportive. Understand that it's like when the kids are learning the first language, they go to different stages. It's the same with a second language, and we have to give them the opportunity and support and give confidence on them. In the future, they're gonna see a lot of benefits as in their career, cultural aspects, and like I said before, now you could say that recent study says that help mental health as well. And it's important that you make your kids aware since little age that by learning an other language, more could be Spanish, English, Chinese, any other language, it's going to be very beneficial at the end. As studies have shown that bilingual or multilingual employers get higher rates than a multilingual employer, and that employers will like to keep bilingual and multilingual employees in their companies better than a multilingual.
And so you're right. You're making me remember that almost every job that I've ever gotten is because I speak Spanish. So I did make more money. I was a bilingual teacher. I had more stipends than the non-bilingual teachers. And so you're right. And the other thing that I would recommend to parents is make it fun for your child at home. Yes. Find video of Spanish songs and learn how to sing happy birthday in Spanish. Learn how to other nursery rhymes in Spanish. Even if you don't speak Spanish, you can motivate your child by learning Spanish along with them, by asking them to tell you what the colors are, tell you what the parts of the body are, tell you what the alphabet is, do spelling words together in Spanish, do the animals. If you have a dog, it's perro. ¿Qué color es tu perro? ¿Qué color es tu gato? Cat. There's so many things that parents can do to help us and to motivate the child in the second language together. So thank you, Ms. Bermudez. Thank you for bringing us data around the success and the opportunity that learning a second language for our English-speaking kids can bring. And I thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Have a great day and be safe.
You too. Well, we've come to the end of our program. I forgot to mention, goodness gracious, my gift is my curse, and that is that I tend to be very single focused on my work. And so when it was time to do the podcast, I did the podcast, and I did not mention that I'm in Puerto Rico. And if any of you, my longtime listeners, know, in October, I did the podcast from Puerto Rico at the Business Center. Today, I didn't do the Business Center because of COVID. They only let a few people in at a time. And so it was easier to do it from my room, so forgive me for the setting, but again, the show must go on, and so I hope that you have enjoyed the information for today. As always, my final reminder to you is that you are part of our PubEd Army, and if you've not reached out to your legislators during this legislative session, which is going on in most states across the country, then please do so. Thank your legislators for all the work that they've done to keep us, as far as public education monies flowing. Remind them that you have the thought that they should not cut public education despite the COVID losses, that never has it been more important to keep funding public education so that we have the money to not only educate, but really over-educate now that we have the COVID slide going on. And so remember, folks, we need you more than ever to support public education so that we can overcome this COVID gap. We can overcome the week of loss of school this year because of the snowstorm that we just had. There's so many things that have impacted our kids as far as schooling. And so never has it been more important for you to help us keep kids going forward in their education, both from a standpoint of content, the standpoint of mental health, the standpoint of anti-racist thought, and making sure that we continue to prepare our kids for their global economy that is needed by us for them. We need our kids to be overly educated so that they can graduate career or vocational or military ready and not to an hourly wage job. All right, everyone. Thank you again for being on, and we'll see you next week.